Am I right in assuming that on your screens you see page 738 and it says how to use extension methods and lambda expressions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's just a couple pages here. Then there's the two programs, so we will look at both of those. All right. And then I'm going to give you a quick little preview of what we'll do next week in chapter 18, what we'll do next week in chapter 19, and a little bit of Parameterised as well. All right. So this first part of the chapter that we went over talked about link expressions. All right. And it says that a lot of the stuff that's built into link is done using what are referred to as extension methods. All right. Now it says it's like a regular method, except that it's defined outside of the data type that it's used with. All right. The first example that they have here, again, it's a very simplistic example. They get a string that has a phone number in it, and then they pass a separator with that string. In the case that they use here, I think they use periods. So for instance, my phone number at Rankin would be 314 period 286 period 3675. You could use hyphens, you could use whatever you wanted to do. All right. Now they say that what you have to do is notice three things about what we're about to look at. First, it's a static method stored inside of a static class. So when you use these extension methods, you have to do that. Static method, static class. And again, static means virtually that it's one thing. You don't have to new it or instantiate it. There's just one of them, and it's shared by every part of the program. Second, it says that data type of the first parameter identifies the .NET class or structure. You'll see this in a minute. For instance, if you're working in, like they have in this example, it'll be the string class. All right. And third, when you declare the first parameter, you have to use the this keyword. Now, if you haven't already, seen this on one or more occasions, that sometimes when you use a programming language, it'll ask you to do certain things syntactically. And, if you were to say to me, okay, we're doing this, and I get that we're doing this, but why? And the answer, that I give, and it sounds almost smart alecky, but it's not meant to, is because they can. Someone who has created that language figured out that this is the best way to do this, and this is the syntax that should be used. So for lack of better words, it's a necessary evil. It's something that we have to do. All right. Once you've defined an extension method, you can use it as shown in the figure. We're going to look at that in a minute. All right. So it says now that you have an idea of how these work, no, we haven't looked at it yet. Now it says we can go and look at some of the methods that are used along with link. All right. So again, let's talk first about what they just mentioned that's in here. Public static. Public static. This is the class name. All right. And in here, this must be the type that you're using in here. Since we're using a string, that's why we've got the word string. Also, the first parameter, before you put it in, must have the word this in it. That's what they just mentioned. Again, this is because they require you to do this syntactically. All right. So what are they doing? They're saying grab this string and start at location 1 and go 3 locations. So 0, 1, and 2, then add the separator, which is a period. All right. Then start with location 3, which is the fourth one, 0, 1, 2, 3. All right. And go 3 more and give me the next 3 numbers, then another separator, which puts us between 3 plus 3 at 6. So then give us the next 4 digits. So it's expecting a pattern with a total of 10 things in it. All right. And in this case, you might say, well, yeah, it's expecting 10 numbers. It would work even if they weren't numbers. It would look weird, but you could have, in this case, you could have had ABC dot DEF dot GHIJ. It wouldn't have made much sense, but you could have done that. And you probably have seen that sometimes different companies, that they have, they take the word of the company or whatever if they can get it, and it's 1-800 this or that type of thing. Okay, that type of an idea. All right. So these are the extension methods. The good news is these are pretty much the same ones we've been looking at. Where is the same, order by is the same, but now notice that we've got an order by descending, not just an order by. All right. And then notice if we want to do multiple things, you can do a then by or a then by descending. Select is the same and join is the same. So as they mention right here, these extension methods, they provide an additional means, all right, for you to do different things and to create your own things. I'm not going to read this because it's the same stuff we just looked at. So these are Lambda expressions, all right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, before I go through this, I want to quick show you an example. All right. This is an example of a Lambda expression right there in the blue on your screen. All right. What you're saying is what comes after the equal sign followed immediately by a greater than sign, what comes after that is not always, but it's usually an expression. All right. So I want all the totals that are greater than 150. I want you to basically, that's the variable that I'm using to hold those total. And I want you to take the results of that and put it into invoice over 150. Now, I'm not saying does that make sense or does it not, but at least intuitively, it should make some sense. All right. When you work with this, back in chapter 13, they talked about delegates. Delegates are one of those things, to be honest with you, I can't speak for Mr. Gudmested, but I go over quickly because I don't use them. And it's not that you can't use them, they have their place. But what a delegate is basically is when you create something that you have delegated authority to do something else for you in a program. All right. So quite often you use delegates with Lambda expressions, but you don't have to. All right. So they mention here a Lambda expression is a function without a name. It's also known as an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. It evaluates an expression and it returns a value. All right, so it'll be a parameter list. You'll see this in a minute, followed by that Lambda expression operator. As it says, means goes to, and then an expression. All right, then they talk about delegates. I'm not going to get into that anymore. But they do say near right here, in this expression, the lambda, in this example, I should say, the lambda expression is assigned to a variable. All right. Then in the code that executes the lambda expression, the variable is used to refer to the expression. When you use it with link, however, you code them inline, as you'll see in just a minute. So that's what we're going to look at now. So as they mention here, several of the extension methods used to implement link, all right, define one or more parameters that accept lambda expressions. Anything that you write as a lambda expression, you can go back and write it as one of these query expressions that we looked at earlier. And the reverse is, at least as far as I know, either always true or almost always true. You can go and use the regular expression and rewrite it as a lambda expression. So they say here this second example should help you understand how this works. The query uses extension methods and Lambda expressions instead of C# clauses. What does that mean? That's this one right here. All right. You end up, just so you know, the more you get into working with computer programming languages, doing this. All right. Keegan, you may or may not remember, but we did some of that stuff when we looked at jQuery. And Angie, you will do that next semester. But what it does is it says, take this invoice list and run all these commands on it. All right. Now, when you look at it, okay, there's a where, there's an order by, there's a then by descending, and there's a select. Okay, fine. Where's the from? The from is right here. It's basically this invoice list that you're running it on. So you'll notice what we don't see here is a from statement, because for lack of better words, it's implied. And when they meant what they mentioned on the bottom here, notice when the query is compiled, it's translated into a method-based query. So the system knows how to handle it. And you'll notice when you look in here, it's using 1, 2, 3, 4 different lambdas. All right. And that's why, hopefully you're understanding that I'm not spending a lot of time on this. This could be a class into and of itself. I think what we will have to do next year, and again, I will have to talk to Mr. Gudmested about this to get his thoughts, is to come up with a way that we have a minimum of close to 6 weeks at the end of the semester. And I still think that the way that I introduced this to you by showing you regular SQL was the right way, because it's still used in a lot of applications, in a lot of companies. But I think that building something and then basically trying to convert it, or either that or add to it and add link to it, I think just makes you that much more valuable as an employee. All right. So as it says here, and we'll look at this in just a second, the user interface is shown in figure 2310. It's a very simple form that uses a list of invoices. And as they mentioned, it's sorted by invoice total in descending sequence within a customer name. What does that mean? You'll see it in a minute. The list in here is displayed in what's called a list view control. All right, that's one of the things that is actually in our toolbox. You'll see what it looks like in just a second. All right, so what do we have? Well, notice it is in order based on, customer name, last name, comma, first name. All right, and you'll notice that Sarah Chamberlain has a bunch of different orders. So if you've got a bunch of different orders for the same customer, so this is what you're sorting by, then by this in descending order is what they're saying. All right. So this is a list view. It kind of, not exactly, but it kind of looks like a spreadsheet without the lines through it. All right. So if we look on here, they talk about the code for the form, but let's take a look at this. It says you should know that the customer and the invoice classes used by this code are the same classes shown earlier in the chapter. So they're not repeated. In other words, customer has a name, has an ID number, etc. All right. It says we also won't present the database classes that contain the methods. All right. It's because it doesn't matter where these methods get the data from, because again, since they're using link, it doesn't matter if it's coming from a database, from a collection of invoices, or from whatever. All of the code they mentioned for the form is placed in the load event handler for the form, so the list automatically comes up. Form load runs when the form is loaded into memory. All right, we're not doing anything with this. We are just displaying that information. You'll notice in here there's no buttons, there's no menu options, there's no anything in here. So this is just meant in this list view to display information. We're not allowed to change it or anything else. All right. And the author mentions a couple things and it says, first, notice that the query expression joins data from the invoice and customer lists. All right. And it's necessary because we are combining information from those lists. And we want to make sure that, for example, if a customer has got more than one invoice, like that Sarah Cumberland or whatever her name was, we only want her name to be in there once. All right. In here, the expression does not include a where clause because we want to include all of the results. Finally, the results are sorted by the invoice total on the outside, but on the inside, or the main thing, is the customer name. And finally, only the fields that are required are included in the results. So if we take a look at this, all right, and again, I can run it for you, but the highlight is shown on the screen here. So what are we saying? In our load event, which normally doesn't have hardly anything, if anything, in it, we're creating these two lists. So our customer list is going to use the customer.db class, which has in there a method called getCustomers, which just returns all the customers for us. In the same way, the invoice list gets its data from the invoice DB class, which has got to get invoices in it. Between those two, there's data in there that we don't care about. Again, from the customer, we only care about their last name and their first name. And from the invoice, as you already saw, we only care about the ID, the date, and the total. So when we query, we only grab the information that we're looking for. All right, so that's basically our query. So what we're saying is we want to join together on the customer ID these two tables. You saw an example of that before. We want to take the results that we get from there and we want to order them by customer name first, all right, and then by the invoice total in descending order. But what we want to select from here are only these four fields. All right. So again, we are defining the query variable in here. Then we're coming in here, we're creating a new variable called customer name, where we're going to concatenate together the customer last name, a comma, and the customer first name. All right. And as we come through here, in this for each, what are we doing? Well, we want to make sure, again, if we've already listed the customer's name, we don't list it again. All right. So if the invoice name doesn't equal the customer name, okay, then we've got a new name to add. Otherwise, we're just adding to the same customer. All right. And that's really what's down here. All right. And then we run through. And as it says, we're adding, it says sub items. It doesn't really matter, but we're adding the ID to this. We are adding the date to this. And we are adding the invoice total to that. Okay. Again, I don't want to sit and read this to you. We're using generic lists. We're sorting on two different fields. We're doing a join. All right. So that is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, the other thing they talk about in here, is to use what's called a typed data set. When you use link, you're able to take link and use different things for your data source. You're also able to take link and basically send things to different kinds of data sources. All right. They mention in here, if you're not familiar with typed data sets, you might want to refer to chapter 18. We did go over 18, but we went over it like that. That's why next week I'm gonna backtrack, for lack of better words, and go through chapters 18 and 19. So again, this is done in a little bit more automated fashion. As it says, it presents the data schema. That's this. All right. So the schema is, in this case, this schema is shown pictorially. Plus, they're showing you here that there is a relationship here. The relationship actually is here and here. And you should be able to tell, looking at it, that since customers has the primary key by it, and customer ID here does, and it doesn't here, this would be the parent table, this would be the child table. So every 0, 1 or more customers, all right, I should say really every one customer has 0, 1 or more invoices. And that's what they're showing you right there. All right. It says, although you can't tell from this feature, the fill queries retrieve the rows and columns from this stuff. So in other words, what you get when you use this, when you use these data sets, is some of the code is written for you, for lack of better words, kind of behind the scenes. When you set it up, code will be added for you to fill things up for you. Well, that's kind of a nice thing. Technically, and it might make you feel bad after all the work that we've done on our project, but you can write a fairly simplistic relational database management system, and there's a good chance you'll have to write only a few lines of code. In the best case, just a couple, and everything else will be done for you. It's all automated. The problem with doing it that way, and the reason I didn't do it that way, is, okay, fine, but what if something ever happens underneath the hood? Now, at least you going through the example you did, you've got at least somewhat of an understanding of what's going on under the hood. All right. So they mention here, that's the data set. All right. It says because the customer invoice application doesn't use all of these columns, the data source could have been defined to only give the required columns. So in other words, this is everything. But when you create the data set, for instance, from here, we're not using address, city, state, or zip code. So we could have deleted those. In here, we're not using the customer ID. We're not using the sales tax. We're not using the shipping. We've only got the invoice ID, the invoice date, and I think the invoice total. So we only need to include what we need to include. All right. And you might say, well, how can you do that? It's not a database schema. It's a data set schema. So it's the members of the database that you're actually using here for the operation that you want to go through. All right. So next, we'll quickly look at this as we did the other one. It says the figure on the next page presents the code for the customer invoice form that uses the type data set. All right. It says it doesn't use any bound controls. That's one reason I want to go back to 18 and 19. I want to explain to you what bound controls are. All right. So it says here, again, we'll do a join. It says similarly to sort, without using link, you'd have to write code to do the sorting yourself. All right. So the idea is this is doing the same thing that we saw before. Now, you might look at this and go, well, maybe it is, but it looks a lot more difficult. All right. So what do we have? Well, now notice what we have in here is we're creating a new data set, which is kind of everything in total that we want. And we have an invoices table adapter and a customers table adapter. Hopefully what you recall from what we have been doing for the last week or so is we've used adapters. All right, you will see adapters again when you take the Java Android class. You use adapters in a lot of different things you do. And if you don't know, an adapter basically allows two things that otherwise could not communicate to be able to communicate with one another. I may have given you this example before, I may not have, but Now, almost 30 years ago, my wife and I went to Colombia, South America to adopt our daughter. All right. And we were told when we went there, make sure you buy an adapter because the electricity and the amps or whatever it is works differently in South America than it does here. So we needed an adapter, something to plug into the wall and to plug into the back of whatever electrical appliance we were using so it would work. And it's the same kind of thing in here. All right. You'll notice we've got these fill statements, which will do just that. And the key thing is in here. And ideally, what you notice in here is it's very similar. From, join, select, order by. All right, so it's doing it pretty much the same way. And they mentioned the query expression is almost identical to the query expression that uses generic lists. The only difference is it's using data sources and tables. So rather than getting its information from lists, it's getting its information from an actual database. All right. And they try to sell you on this. It says, Link makes it easy to join and sort the two tables used by the application. You may or may not agree. You just looked at it for the first time, so it may not make a lot of sense. All right. Three more things quickly I want to do with you. The first is this. I'm moving backwards about 200 pages because we're going to go over chapter 18 on Monday and Tuesday of next week. What does that mean? I want to show you how you can go in and create a data source and use a data source, how you can handle errors that come up with data sources, and how you can use the data set designer. So I want to go through all that stuff with you. It'll be over 2 days, and hopefully we'll be doing it in conjunction with a project, which will, again, hopefully make it a little bit easier for you to understand. Then on Wednesday and Thursday, we will go over how to work with bound controls and parameterized queries. So in other words, what we did was we manually came in and created our own text boxes, our own combo boxes, etc. You don't have to do it that way. All right. In other words, you can come in here and basically, this is not a great example. I think the better example is on the previous chapter. But you can go in and have this stuff all created for you automatically. All right. But again, I'm giving you this example before. You may or may not agree. But, you know, I'm not trying to teach you how to work on an engine by just showing you pictures, which is kind of when you automate this stuff, it's kind of what you're doing. I wanted us to do that project so you can see what's happening under the hood, so you can see and do it yourself. All right, what the system can do more automatically for you. All right, then we'll look at parameterized queries, the tool strip control, and look at a couple of other examples of things that are in here. All right. Finally, last thing I want to say, and that is, Angie, this is more for your benefit. All right. I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to start my share again in just a second. I went out and started looking online. Hopefully you can see a thing here that says Mobirise, and they talk about a tutorial on it. Can you see that on your screen right now?
Yes.
Right here? Okay. This is 2 years old. And believe it or not, it's one of the newer things they have out there. All right. And it's 14 minutes, 36 seconds long. I looked through it, not in a lot of detail. One thing about it, with it being 2 years old, only 13 people have commented on it, which probably means it's not that great, but it's something you can look at. All right, let me stop and start again. The next one I found, good news is, look at this, April 20th, 2020. So it's pretty doggone nice. All right. The disadvantage of this is there's no talking. But if you go through this, it's only 5.5 minutes long. The guy shows you exactly how this is drag and drop. I'm going to play just a little bit of it. So you come in here, you start dragging things, and this is going to be the website that you create. You look through there, oh, I want this. I drag it over, boom, I've got it. Boom, I've got it. I want to put something in where it wasn't, boom, I can put it in there. Now you can go back and you can change these pictures, you can change these images, you can change the text, you can change the color, you can change the background color. The reason that I would recommend you using Mobirise is, to my knowledge, you have no experience using HTML. And it's a lot more work to do it using HTML and using JavaScript and using CSS. That's what this stuff does behind the scenes. All right. The other thing, and again, I'm going to stop the share and start the share again. Oh, where is it? Give me just a sec. Here it is. All right. All right. You see a guy on there with Wix behind him right here?
Yes.
Okay. That has nothing to do with it. About 4 years ago, a gentleman named Brian Hafferkamp, all right, he created a whole series on Mobirise. There's 27 videos. No, I don't expect you to watch them. The point is, if you decide that you'd like to learn how to use this product, all right, you might want to at least watch a couple of the videos in here. This is Mobirise, I think version 3 or one of the late 2s. 4 is the one that's being used now. But he's an easy guy to listen to. That's the good news. The bad news is he's very deliberate. So you can see all the stuff that's in here. And I'm not saying you want to watch any of those. But like I said, if you wanted something on how to get started, I would at least start with the first one that I'd shown you. And all I did was I came in here and I Googled, not Googled, but I searched inside of here for Mobirise 4 tutorial. And when you do that, all right, here's that one, the first one that I showed you. Maybe you can see this, maybe you can't. Here's the thing with Brian Hafferkamp, and there's other ones too. All right. This is that one that I just, one of these is the one I mentioned. It's like 5 minutes long. Some of these are really good. Some of them you're going to look at for 5 or 10 seconds and you'll know that's not really any good. All right. So what I'd like you to do, you should be able to do it today, Angie, if you have not. And that is, at a minimum, if you haven't done so already, download Mobirise. And if you have downloaded it already, where is it? No, I don't want you. That's not what I want. All right. And if you have done it, go back and start taking a look at some of the things that are in here. Here's another one that I just found. I'll show it to you in a sec. So here's another one. Literally, when you start, this is what you do. All right. In fact, I've got Mobirise. Let's see if I can bring it up. I've got Mobirise 4 on my system. All right. So I'm going to see if I can stop my share and make my share be Mobirise. All right. So here's Keegan. Hopefully that's okay. Here's Keegan's. I don't know if can you see that or not? Is that on the screen?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to skip this. You're always asked about, downloading new updates, etc. to it. You don't have to do any of that. But notice You know, and Keegan, with a lot of the stuff that he did in here, he just did a bunch of drag and drop. All right, you'll notice he didn't change that. If you want, you can put your own contact information in there. There's all sorts of different stuff that you can do. When you get started, there'll be a start button down here. And when you click that, this is how you can add things. I'm not going to do this. This is probably my copy of his. But if I wanted to, I could just take this, drag it in, boom. You can see it's going to put it in there. If I don't want this anymore, I just click on it. I go up to the top, and there's this little gear thing right here that's called block parameters. And one of the things that'll be in here is I can hide it, or I can change the colors. I can do whatever I want to do with it. So download it, and if you get a chance, play with it a little bit. And Keegan, I'd suggest that you've already got it downloaded, but take a look at yours, because yours now, you know, I'm going to expect it to be a little bit more professional in that either this should have something to do with what you're doing, or it shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that's not anywhere close to what mine.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. This might be something that you gave me at a long, long time ago. All right, and again, you can change the picture that's in here. You can set up a slideshow with your slides in it. You can have as many or as few as you want. If you want a slideshow, typically you're going to have at least 3 or 4 in there. So I have no homework for you for the weekend, but I'd like you to do that. So do you both understand what I'm asking you to do?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll talk to you then on Monday. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.